own without American soldiers here. He said, all we need are the weapons to fight the Russians. Our people love our country enough to keep it if they have the weapons they need to fight the fight. Look, this is a proxy war between us and China. Do not be fooled by that. The Chinese are funding the Russians. They are buying Russian oil when no one else is and funding this war for Putin. They set up for Kim Jong-un to come from North Korea and meet with Putin just last week to give North Korean arms to the Russians. The Ayatollah and the mullahs in Iran have already supplied drones and other weapons to the Russians. Those four, the Chinese, the Russians, the North Koreans, and the Iranians, authoritarian, autocratic dictatorships, three of them communist, are banding together to try to fill a vacuum that the United States has left in world leadership. Barack Obama did not lead the world. Donald Trump didn't do it, and neither is Joe Biden. And they are ready to fill that vacuum. I met the Japanese ambassador recently, and I said to him, if your prime minister was sitting in front of me and I were to ask him as the new president, what's the one thing that America could do to help Japan the most? You know what he said? Lead. He said, when America leads the world, Japanese citizens sleep soundly at night. When America doesn't lead the world, we worry about who will. So this fight's coming one way or another, everybody. We can help the Ukrainians send a message to those four, or the next fight's going to be Taiwan. Because if the Chinese see us cut and run here, they're coming there. And even if you don't care about the Taiwanese, and you don't care about their freedom and their liberty, and you don't care about the health or safety of their families, if you don't care about any of that, how about this? 2/3 of all the semiconductors in the world are manufactured in Taiwan. And everybody who walks around with a cell phone, who has thermostats in their house, who starts a car every day to go to work, semiconductors are in every one of the things that we do now. Who do you want controlling that? The Taiwanese and the United States, or the communist Chinese? And I guarantee you we'll be at the back of the line for those. So even if you're not caring about the freedom and liberty issue, we have a practical economic and lifestyle issue to defend there as well. And I think that most Americans, a majority of Americans, believe that we should help them. Some of the louder voices in our party say things like, if I were president, I'd settle this war in 24 hours. That's, of course, Donald Trump, who will settle in 24 hours. Let me tell you how he'll settle it. He'll give Ukraine to his friend Putin, and then it'll be settled. You have Ron DeSantis saying it's a territorial dispute. Tell that to the people who were dragged out of their homes and shot in the back of the head. A territorial dispute, where I come from, is like when you get your property surveyed, and the surveyor comes to you and says, bad news, your neighbor's fence is 1.5 feet on your property. That's a territorial dispute. What's happening in Ukraine is far from that. And Vivek Ramaswamy says he's going to convince Putin to abandon the Chinese and be our friend. A former KGB agent who said the worst day in world history is when the Soviet Union collapsed is going to be friends with us and not the communist Chinese. Time for him to go back to Harvard. Learn a little bit more before he starts saying stuff like that. I had someone ask me at an earlier town hall meeting, why is it our responsibility? And I'll end with this. There's a lot of reasons that I just laid out, but this is the price we pay. for being the richest and freest country the world's ever known. And if we want to remain the richest and freest country the world's ever known, then we have to lead. It's one of our responsibilities. And I'd much rather have a world that has America setting the standard than one that has the communist Chinese who sent people to concentration camps because of how they practice their religious beliefs, restricts the number of children their citizens can have, and tells you what you can say and when you can say it. They're not having this meeting tonight in Beijing, I can guarantee you that. So New Hampshire can determine what the next 4 years of America is going to be. And I'm up here because I'm counting on you to do it. And I think you will. And I promise you that you will not always agree with me. No doubt, you will not always agree with me. But you will never go to bed one night when I'm president wondering what I'm thinking. You're going to know. If you don't like it, have at me. If you do like it, support me. But either way, you're not going to have to wonder what I'm thinking. And that's the kind of leader I think we need in this country, is someone who's willing to say it plainly and directly to you and then deliver on what they say. So that's enough for me. Thank you. So we have some folks around with microphones. This is really easy. This is not like some of the other town halls you may have come to. You don't have to pre-submit your questions in writing to be screened by my staff to see if I like the question or have an answer for it. There's no one here who's been pre-selected for a question, so I know what's going on. And I have no idea whether you're here tonight because you're for me, against me, undecided, or just bored and decided, why not? It looks like something's happening down there, I'll show up. So we're just gonna pick on folks. Raise your hand, I'll call on you, someone will bring a microphone, and you ask me a question, and you're gonna get an answer. And we'll see how that goes. So let us start. Who's gonna start? Sir, right back there. And here's a guy with a microphone right here.
Sorry. Thank you. We all have to balance our budgets every month. I'm worried about the future of our country. When are we going to balance the budget?
Yeah. Well, no time soon. Let's start with that. I mean, Joe Biden is going to give us a budget this year that is $2 trillion in deficit for the year. Donald Trump ran for president 8 years ago. I was on the stage when he said it. He said, I'm a businessman. I have to balance my budgets all the time. He said, I will balance the federal budget in 4 years. And in 4 years, he added $7 trillion to the national debt. The most debt ever added by a president in 4 years. So let's start with this. You elect either one of those guys, we're going to be going in the direction of higher and higher debt and deficits. And by the way, I'll give you one funny story from when I was governor of New Jersey about why I know Donald feels this way. When I got into office, I inherited an $11 billion deficit on a $29 billion budget from my fabulous predecessor, John Corzine, former CEO of Goldman Sachs, another businessman who knew about how to balance budgets, but not really. And so I get in there, and it is, as you might imagine, it is an ugly thing that you got to confront. So I get a call from my friend Donald Trump. And when I say my friend Donald Trump, at that time, by 2009, we had been friends for 8 years at that point. He and Melania sat in the first pew in church at my inaugural mass. So we're friends. And he calls me and he said, I got a great idea for you to fix this budget thing. I'm looking for help from anybody at this point, right? So sure, what do you got, Donald? He goes, go bankrupt. I swear to you. I said, no. You don't understand, Donald. States are not allowed to go bankrupt. And he goes, no. Just do it. And I said, no, the law is against it. He goes, just do it. They'll sue you. You'll distract everybody. By the time you get done with the court case, people won't remember whether you balanced it or you didn't balance it. Just go bankrupt. That's all you need to know, okay? That was his advice to the governor, who had a constitutional responsibility to balance a budget. Here's what I did do, and this is what I would do as president. I instituted something that's called zero-based budgeting, which is you don't assume that what they spent last year is where they start for next year. You start at zero for every department, and you make them come into you and say, okay, you spent X, in the state cases, hundreds of millions of dollars last year. I want you to go through every one of those programs and tell me why I should continue to fund it. What did that lead us to do? I eliminated 683 programs in my first year as governor. And I want to tell you the truth, though, it was not popular, because every one of those programs had a constituency. Every one of those programs someone was benefiting from, and I was taking their program away. And so my popularity rating went from like the mid-50s when I got into office into like the mid to high 30s after I did that first budget. And the same thing will happen when I'm president. If you do what I'm suggesting you do, you are going to make a lot of people unhappy. But by the time we got to 4 years later, I got reelected with 61% of the vote in a blue state, because we saw this polling. People said, we don't like that he cut this program, we don't like that he cut that program, but we like that he did it. We like that he did something. And he didn't raise our taxes to fix the problem. He cut spending. What we need to do with the federal government is the exact same thing. We need to question every program and then say, look, if it's justified, okay. If it's not, goodbye. And I will take enormous heat for it. Congress, they pander like nobody you've ever seen in the world. But that's what we need to do to get the thing moving back in the right direction. I don't think I'll balance the budget in 4 years. Not from a $2 trillion debt to zero. It's not going to happen. I would hope you could do it in 8. But you got to get it moving in that direction, because remember this, with interest rates where they are now, we had cheap money for a long time. But with interest rates where they are now, by the time I'm president, we will probably be paying $1 trillion a year in debt service. $1 trillion a year, not on anything but servicing the debt. It's not sustainable. You're right to be worried. And we have to have an honest conversation about it. And we haven't had one. And you haven't heard anybody around New Hampshire talking about this, specifically about how they do it, other than me. And the reason is because they're afraid it'll be unpopular. My mother taught me something a long time ago. She said to me, Chris, if you have a choice between being loved and being respected, take respected. Because if you're respected, they may eventually love you. But if they love you and they don't respect you, they're going to leave you pretty quick. And so that's the way I would approach it. It's a really important question. We start at zero and work our way up, and hopefully then work our way back down from a $2 trillion deficit this year to a balanced budget in 8. If we can do that, that will have been the biggest achievement I could have achieved as president, not even knowing what else I'll do, and give our grandchildren, forget our children are already in bad shape. Give our grandchildren a chance to be able to have America be a place they can afford to live and have a career that they can feel good about. That's what we need to get to. So thanks for your question. Other questions? Yes, ma'am, right here. Here comes the microphone right here.
I appreciate your sympathy for Taiwan. I have Taiwanese students myself. I let them, appreciate them. But would you have us recognize Taiwan? Because as you well know, the PRC considers Taiwan part of their country, and we're recognizing only one China.
I don't think we have to recognize Taiwan, and I don't think Taiwan is demanding that we do. I think Taiwan, for the moment, and quite frankly now for nearly 50 years, has been willing to accept the fact that we are not recognizing them formally, and they don't have formal independence, but if you've been there, you know that they operate really autonomously. And so I don't think we need to do it. Let's not pick a fight we don't need to have. But on the other hand, let's not invite one either. And by walking away from Ukraine, in my view, we are going to invite the fight in Taiwan, because President Xi is an ambitious guy. And remember, this is the guy that Donald Trump told us we could completely trust when it came to COVID. He was going to control it in China, keep it there, and we had nothing to worry about. He also said he's brilliant and out of central casting. I don't know exactly what that last one means, but for a guy who used to be on a TV show, I think we know what he meant. We don't have to recognize Taiwan. I'm not advocating for that. But what I am saying is we've got to make sure that we send a clear signal to the PRC, which is hands off. Because if they go and do it, we're going to be compelled to go. We're not going to have a choice. And anybody who stands up here and tells you differently is not telling you the truth. Because as a practical matter, we can't allow the Chinese to control 2/3 of all the semiconductors in the world. We can't. So maybe it was different 20 or 30 years ago. And maybe policy should have been different 20 or 30 years ago that didn't let the Taiwanese become that dominant in the semiconductor market. But it is the reality of today. So no, I'm not an advocate for recognizing Taiwan and for changing that policy with China. But I am well aware, as are many of you in this room, that if we give the Chinese an opening, they're going to take it. Remember, over the last 10 years, the Chinese army has grown faster in a 10-year period. Chinese military has grown faster in that 10-year period than any country has ever grown in 10 years in the world history. They are not doing that for show. They're getting ready. And we have to be ready too. Other questions? Yes, sir, right there. Here you go. Thank you.
Good evening, Governor Christie. My question to you is, from one middle-aged Bruce Springsteen fan to another, I'm in the board category, by the way, too, is that what was your involvement, if any, in the 2013 Fort Lee lane closure scandal, AKA Bridgegate?
Yeah, nothing. So, you know, look, this question is come up now 2 town halls in a row. I'm confident it's not coincidental, especially since my answer is being videoed.
Oh, I'm not part of any conspiracy, Governor, for the record, okay?
No, of course not.
I haven't seen that. I was unaware of that, too, for the record, okay?
Right, but, yeah, no, nothing. And, you know, I had 3 employees who went off and literally played in traffic. And when I found out about it, I fired them. And there was extensive investigations afterwards by a Democratic legislature, by a Democratic United States attorney, and by the Attorney General's office, all of which found the same thing, that I had nothing to do with it. But here's what it means, though. I'm still accountable. Because I had 60,000 people work for me when I was governor, and 3 of them were those people. And so even though I didn't do it, I have to be held accountable for it. And so I've been accountable for it. I'll always answer questions about it. But in the end, the most important thing for you to know is, when I found out that someone was doing something wrong on my watch, I did what responsible leaders do. I fired them, I took accountability for it, and then I moved on. And if, you know, but the one thing I did learn from all of it is that personnel is policy, everybody. And the people who work for you help define you, whether you directly picked them or you just inherited them. So I have no regrets about my conduct. I have a lot of regrets about theirs. But in the end, they got what was coming to them. And the people in New Jersey understood, I think, very clearly that they had a governor who was unafraid to make decisions, even if it meant being accountable for one that they had no involvement in. So that's 2013. Yes, sir, right there.
How you doing? I'm not good at public speaking, but I'm going to try. I'm trying to find out, well, the economy, gasoline's going through the roof. And every single time we go through this 10 to 15-year cycle of the economy going up and
Move
down,
a little closer to you.
up and down, it always revolves around basically the cost of energy, i.e. gasoline, heating oil, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm trying to find out is how the government never got involved. It's not you, but in general, how would you solve this issue? Motiva in Texas, it was the biggest refinery in this country. And they operate at 95% capacity. They don't want to produce anymore because they're at the top of their profit margin. And don't get me wrong, it's a capitalist country. But where do you get into? And now, out of the middle of nowhere, this I can't pronounce it, Armco, it's A-R-M.
Yeah, it's a Saudi company.
Saudi company. They outright buy this whole corporation right out. Why would the government, why would the United States government allow the Saudi government to buy the biggest oil refinery in this country and dictate how much they're going to produce, the cost that's going to go out? They turn the spigot off in Saudi Arabia, and they drive the energy costs right up through the door. And this was done in 2018, signed off by the governor of Texas and Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I don't understand why people are not in an uproar over it.
Well, they should be. And let me suggest to you a few things. You know, our relationship with Saudi Arabia has always been a complicated one. We have to try to make it as good as we can make it. We have a lot of differences, obviously. They're not a democracy. They're a kingdom, and the royal family there runs what's going on. I would have never approved that if I were president. And the fact is that it makes you wonder, right? Like, we're having all this conversation now, and I'll get back to energy in a second as a bigger issue, but I know what you're getting at also. It makes you wonder. We watch Hunter Biden now, you know, who obviously, I mean, I think it's obvious to everybody, traded on his family name to make money. Like, why else is like a Ukrainian company hiring Hunter Biden? I mean, no particularly special skills, it seems there, but his last name was Biden. And I think we're going to find out more and more about that over time. That's not going to reflect well on Hunter Biden and may not reflect well on the president. But you got to control your own family. How about we start with that? If you're president of the United States, control your own family and don't have them trading off of the office that you've been given. And we had the same thing with Donald Trump. Now, 6 months after he leaves office, his daughter and his son-in-law, Ivanka and Jared Kushner, get $2 billion from the Saudis in their investment fund. $2 billion. And that money sits in that investment fund for 2 years and is invested in nothing. All it's used for is to pay management fees to Jared Kushner. Managing what? What does he do every month? Call the bank and say, hey, is the money still there? Yes, it is. Okay, good. Here's my management fee. Didn't invest it in anything. We have to stop this banana republic stuff where families are getting rich off of a relative service as president of the United States. And you have to wonder whether that purchase had anything to do with the way they get treated 6 months after they leave office. That's why I'll make it really clear. There'll be nobody in my family who goes into any business that they weren't in before I became president. So that they can't go into some new business and trade on the fact that I'm elected and they could trade that influence. It's wrong. It's just wrong. Now, on the energy issue, this is why Joe Biden's been so bad for this country by restricting the amount of oil and gas that we can produce. We're producing 1 million barrels less a day in North Dakota since Joe Biden was president than we did when Trump was president. And what it does is it gives the Saudis and others in the Middle East and the Venezuelans and the Russians the ability to leverage the price of oil around the world because the United States is not producing nearly as much as they used to. We need to produce that oil, make ourselves energy self-sufficient, and export our oil and natural gas to our friends in Europe so they don't have to buy it from the Middle East or Russia. That'll make us a more profitable country and also give us more control over our own destiny, which is part of what you're talking about. And that destiny is, how much do you pay at the pump to fill up your car? How much do you pay when you buy home heating oil? How much do you pay when you buy natural gas? All of that can be determined, not exclusively, but largely inside this country. If we're energy self-sufficient, we're not have to buy it from other people. So we need to get much more aggressive about that. And one last thing on energy, we need to do more nuclear energy. You know, in my state, we're the most densely populated state in America. And 53% of our electricity is produced by nuclear power in the most densely populated state in the country. If we can operate it safely, and we have for nearly 50 years now in New Jersey, you can do it anywhere. And it is clean, reliable energy to help the grid have the energy, the electricity you need. And the last thing is, a president should be authorizing building pipelines from where we have our natural gas to where we need it. It's absurd that I'm going to be coming 8 years later back to New Hampshire with the natural gas revolution we've had in this country, and you all are going to still have to be buying home heating oil because they won't permit pipelines to come in here. I know Governor Sununu has fought hard to get this done, but he got stopped by the governors in New York. The president has to step in and say, there is a national security interest in getting this done, to be having reliable sources of affordable energy in every part of our country, and not let a governor who's playing to the environmental left be able to stop folks in New Hampshire and Vermont and Massachusetts from having affordable energy that is abundant in this country. So we got a lot of work to do on that. But I think it's the good news, as opposed to some of the problems we'll talk about tonight, this is fixable pretty quick because we have the resources here to do it. Just need a president who's not going to, you know, bow to this, you know, green agenda on the left that, you know, has ruled the Biden administration and led him to make a lot of bad decisions. And by the way, then he also ticked off the Saudis at the same time, right? So you're producing less, and then you're giving them even more leverage, and then you poke them in the eye on top of it. So what do you think is going to happen? $4 and $5 gasoline is what happened, and we're all paying the price for it. So that's what I would do. Other questions for folks? Yes, sir. Here, take that.
Thank you, Governor. The question I have is, with the difficulty in reaching across the aisle and everything so polarized, how important is the issue that either one of the leading candidates instantly become lame ducks the minute their terms start?
Well, I would hope not. You know, the leading candidates now, as you say, will become lame ducks immediately. People can ignore them. And look, they each probably would be ignored for different reasons. On the Biden side, I think he'd be ignored because he doesn't have the energy anymore to do what you need to do to bring people across the aisle and work together. It takes a lot of hard work and a lot of time. For Donald Trump, when he says, I am your retribution, doesn't sound to me like he's going to be inviting, like, you know, Chuck Schumer and, you know, into the Oval Office to talk about what they can do in the next term. So both of them are not going to be uniters of this country. I had this experience in New Jersey. And remember, I'm in one of the bluest states in the country. Now, there'll be some argument about whether it's us or New York or Illinois or California. But let me make the pitch for why New Jersey is the bluest. We haven't elected a Republican to the United States Senate since 1972. It is the longest streak for any state in the country, including those others, not to elect a Republican to the U.S. Senate. It is a wildly blue state. And when I got elected in 2009, I had a Democratic legislature, 10-vote margin in the Senate, 16-vote margin in the lower house. So I had to make a decision, a fundamental decision when I got in there. Was I going to try to work with the other side, or was I just going to, like, yell and scream and make headlines? And so what I did during the transition was I got in the car and drove over 2 hours to where the Senate president's office was. Now, let me tell you, the Senate president of New Jersey is a guy named Steve Sweeney, who is the president of the Iron Workers Union, another shy and retiring fella like me from New Jersey, right? So I drive down there unannounced to see the Senate president. I go to his office, and I walk in, and his secretary looks like she's going to pass out. Like, what are you doing here? I had no appointment. And she said, Governor-elect, what are you doing here? I said, I want to see the Senate president. And she said, well, you don't have an appointment. I said, I think he'll see me. Is he here? And she said, he is. Let me go see if he's available. So she goes and walks back there, and then I figured out why she was being so standoffish about it. He came out. He had just gotten back from the gym. So he was in sweatpants and a T-shirt and sneakers. He's like, Governor, I didn't expect you. And I said, well, I was in the neighborhood, so I decided to stop by. He goes, bullshit, your neighborhood is 2 hours away. And I said, I came here to talk to you. Can we go in your conference room alone? And he said, yeah. I said, look, Steve, we have a fundamental decision to make here. I said, are we going to fight with each other for the next 8 years? And he said, 4 years. I said, 8 years. I said, or are we going to put touchdowns in the end zone? I said, I want to tell you, I want to put touchdowns in the end zone. I said, but I know I need you to do it. So what do you want to do? And he looked at me and he said, I need you to make me one promise. And I said, okay, what's that? And he goes, that you'll always tell me the truth. The first time you lie to me, it's over. And I said, all right, I'll tell you the truth. He stood up, put his hand out, and said, all right, let's try to do this. And for the next 8 years, we didn't always get along. I mean, I remember one Sunday morning going down to the bottom of the driveway to get the newspaper, and the front page of the Sunday paper, in the biggest paper in New Jersey, said, Sweeney, I want to punch Christie in the head. So we did not always get along. But in a blue state, with the Democrats in charge of the legislature, we passed pension reform that saved $120 billion on the state pension. We passed health benefit reform that for the first time required public workers pay a percentage of their health benefits. Before, the taxpayer paid all of them. We passed legislation that fired the entire Camden City Police Department because it was the most dangerous city in America and they wouldn't change. So we fired the entire police department and rehired a new one and trained them in violence de-escalation and community policing. And you know what's happened in the 10 years since we did that? The murder rate in Camden is down 75%, and the overall violent crime rate is down 66%. We did things that you would think Republicans and Democrats could never do together. Here's how you do it. It's harder to hate up close. You've got to get to know people. It's still a people business. And when I got to know Steve's wife, Patricia, and his son, Steve, and his daughter, Lauren, and his daughter, Lauren, who was young, used to come to my office when he would bring her to the State House, and she would come and hang out with me. When you get to know these people on a personal level, you talk to them about why they came here in the first place, what it is they really want to accomplish when they're here. What do they care about the most? You can get things done. But as I was saying in response to one of the earlier questions, it takes a lot of energy. I mean, Mary Pat and I in those 8 years spent more time, not only with people we didn't agree with, but people we didn't even like, than I can count. But they got elected too. So you got to deal with them. Ignoring them leads to what we have in Washington right now, which is nobody gets anything done. And, you know, Ronald Reagan used to say that the guy who disagrees with me 20% of the time is not my 20% enemy, he's my 80% friend. And we got to start to get back to that. And we need someone who knows how to do it because they've done it. And nobody else in this race has. Everybody else in this race is from a red state with red legislatures. And that's all their experience has been, that everybody in the room agrees with each other for the most part. That's not what Washington's going to be. And so, yes, they'll both be lame ducks and I think ignored for different reasons. What we need to do is get somebody in there who, one, won't be a lame duck, and two, has experience in delivering results with the other side. And my job as president will be to use the bully pulpit to argue, to convince you that you should support what I want to do. And they all read those numbers. And the more I convince the more of you to be on my side, the closer the result will be to what I want. but you gotta work it and earn it. You don't get given it. But the closer the result will be to what I want. But you gotta work it and earn it. You don't get given it. But in the end,